on the Common Link Theory, CLT, Chapter 3. Chapter 3. Examining the evidence of the CLT. Evidence presented by Schacht. In justifying the CLT, Schacht sought to convince his readers not only of its validity, but also of its widespread impact, presenting it as a commonplace phenomenon that affected the entire corpus of Hadith. Nevertheless, his main pieces of evidence consisted of one Hadith about the sale of the wala and another known as the Hadith of Barira. Even if we assume that these two Hadiths, the wala Hadith and the Barira Hadith, are fictitious in the way Schacht wants them to be, they can hardly be universalized into a theory which explains the fictitiousness of the entire literature of legal Hadith. In dealing with the first Hadith, Schacht argues that the CLT in the multiple versions of its isnad was Abdullah ibn Dinar, while in the case of the second, he suggests that Hisham was the common link. I shall analyse this evidence in contrast to that of traditionists, referring in the process to primary sources and examining other circumstances that affect the authenticity of the Hadiths in question. Regarding the Hadith pertaining to the sale of wala, Schacht proclaims Ibn Dinar is the common link in the isnads of its several versions. In other words, the Hadith had 8 transmitters, all of whom narrated it from Ibn Dinar, and Ibn Dinar was the only transmitter who narrated it from Ibn Umar, and Ibn Umar was the only transmitter who narrated it from the Prophet. Schacht suggests that the common link, i.e. the fabricator of this Hadith, to be Ibn Dinar, who spread it to 8 transmitters: Shu'bah, Sufyan, Ismail, Ibn Uyayna, Malik, Sulaiman, Ubaydullah, and Dahak. Leaving aside Schacht's assumptions for the moment, a thorough investigation of the primary Hadith sources demonstrates an astonishing conclusion, one that completely contradicts Schacht's claim. Diagram 2 shows the real actual structure of the isnad of this Hadith. Schacht's argument hence contains several problems, the first of which is that Ibn Dinar was not the only transmitter who narrated the Hadith from Ibn Umar. For instance, Mubarak-Furi finds that Nafi' narrated the Hadith from Ibn Umar as recorded in 2 different Hadith collections, one compiled by Ibn Majah and the other by Abu Awana. Additionally, according to Mubarak-Furi, the Hadith was narrated by 35 transmitters, not only by the 8 Schacht asserted. Even more astonishing is the fact that Ibn Umar was not the only transmitter of this Hadith from the Prophet. In the Hadith collection collected by or compiled by Ad-Darimi, we find that Uthman ibn Affan also narrated this report, yet Schacht was oblivious to this evidence. But that is not all. The foundations of Schacht's argument are also called into question because of his failure to recognize that this Hadith cannot be regarded as sufficiently representative of a typical Hadith, and therefore as proof of his argument. Although the Hadith was narrated by 2 companions, Ibn Umar and Uthman, and then by 2 successors from Ibn Umar, Ibn Dinar and Nafi', it was considered abnormally imbalanced by traditionists. Following the level of successors, it was almost entirely disseminated from the branch of Ibn Dinar. 2 famous muhaddiths, Ibn Hajar and Mubarak-Furi, were moved to quote speculations by several traditionists regarding the limited number of transmitters who narrated this Hadith. For instance, Shu'bah said that he would have liked to kiss Ibn Dinar's forehead for narrating this Hadith, a gesture of respect and appreciation, acknowledging in this way its clearly unusual lineage. In view of its irregularity, therefore, it is inadmissible as evidence for the theory that Schacht proposes, and even less as a model. The Hadith is regarded as anomalous, gharib, by one traditionist, although its strength of authenticity lies not in its isnad, but in the fact that several companions had the same opinion on the case mentioned herein. This factor was ignored by Schacht, demonstrating not only his lack of resources, but also his unawareness of the traditionist methods of determining the authenticity of Hadith. Here, the opinion of the companions who transmitted the Hadith, Ibn Umar, Ibn Abbas, Aisha and Abu Hurairah, had a vital role in establishing authenticity. In the second piece of evidence elucidated by Schacht, i.e. the Hadith of Barira, he proclaims that there are 6 transmitters: Malik, Wuhayb, Waki, Hamad, Jarih, and Abdullah ibn Numayr. All of them narrated the Hadith from Hisham, who was the only transmitter to narrate it from his father Urwa, while Urwa was the only one who narrated it from his aunt Aisha. Schacht suggests that Hisham was the common link, and therefore was responsible for its fabrication. The text of this hadith is found in the following primary sources: Bukhari, Muslim, and Abu Dawood. When comparing the isnads found in these sources, however, the data is systematized in the diagram 3. We clearly see the divergence between the findings of Schacht and those of the traditionists. There are, first, that Hisham was not the only transmitter from his father Urwa, since this hadith was also narrated by other transmitters, i.e. Yazid ibn Rumman and Muhammad ibn Muslim. Second, Urwa was not the only transmitter from Aisha, since this hadith was narrated by 5 other transmitters as well: Amra, Al-Asad ibn Yazid, Abdullah ibn Amr, Qasim ibn Muhammad ibn Abi Bakr as-Siddiq, and Ibn Ayman. The third, that Aisha was not the only transmitter of the hadith from the Prophet. Amr ibn al-As narrated the same hadith directly from the Prophet. Schacht's limited access to hadith collections is obvious in this example, as well as in the first, a fact that must have played a role in him leading to form premature conclusions. Therefore, it is not surprising that Schacht erroneously suggests that this hadith has a common link at the level of Hisham, when in reality the evidence shows otherwise. What I have presented here regarding Schacht's argument on the hadith of Barira is little more than what Azimi has pointed out on Schacht's origins of Mohammedan jurisprudence, where he painstakingly discusses where Schacht erred in his analogy. What is more curious is that Azimi's criticisms were entirely ignored by mainstream Western scholarship, leaving Schacht unscathed. Stay tuned.